Good evening, everyone. I want to call the Planning Commission meeting for February 7th? 6th. You know, I always try to leave a day behind, and it is 7 p.m. And so our first order of business is public comment. So is there anybody here for public comment that's signed in?
We do have two signed up for public comment, no virtual at this point.
Okay, go ahead, clerk.
I can call Dan Troyan to the mic.
Hello, everyone. How are you? Dan Troyan, Kenmore resident. I would like to start by thanking Derek for a wonderful chili cook-off. I don't know if any of you made it to that. A local establishment, 192 Brewing. What a good time. Dark beer and chili, you know? New catchphrase for Kenmore, maybe.
He has a special planning commission shot, so you should get that.
You guys got like a backroom VIP deal?
Well, no, there's no back room. You have to ask him for it.
Oh, look at this insider trading, local corruption. My God. Anyway, I would also like to thank David Dorian for speaking on HB 2474. I know some people who tend to be on my side have expressed displeasure with you and Councilmember John Culver speaking on this. I think it's very important that you continue to have a voice and you speak on what you believe in a public setting. I think that's very important, and I don't stand with people that that naysay that in any way. I just want you to know I have your support regardless of if we agree on a topic or not. I would also like to speak on duplexes and townhomes. I think these are very important and a good part of the sort of missing middle housing. For a long time, I think single family residences have really controlled neighborhoods, and they obviously have their place, but I myself live in a townhome. I think it's called a row home. Technically, there's a row of them. And I love it. So please continue with that work. It's important with density and housing. Obviously, that's important for everyone. Lastly, I'd like to talk about bike infrastructure, bicycle infrastructure in particular. That's something very important to me. And I don't know how much the Planning Commission's involved in that, but I know Chris is, so we've had conversations, and I felt like just adding that to the record that I think is important. And I was involved, I don't know if many of you know, I was in a bicycle accident on Juanita Drive with the UPS truck. I didn't win that fight, and regardless of the new bike lanes, there's still an accident, so there's more that needs to be done, and there's more that can be done on that. I know it's expensive and people don't like it, but I'm lucky to be alive. That was a couple months ago, and I just got cleared from PT a week ago. So good for me. Anyway, thank you for your time. Thank you all for being here. Thanks for the staff and everyone for coming out.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have Cara Macias.
Hi, Cara Macias, Kenmore. I just wanted to kind of note something here. I love our diversity goals and action. I think we're missing one planning commissioner, and I see 6 men and 1 woman. And we're all very vastly different in our opinions and our ideas. Maybe one person stands out. So just a little thought there. I want to make sure that as we continue work and continue planning forward, we're listening to everyone's voices, the, bad actors, residents, that too. But there's a big docket. There's a lot of work to get through. I was hoping for a little more people in the audience today, but keep going. It's important, but make sure to keep us all in mind. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I understand there's no one else. Is that correct, Madam?
That is
Clerk?
correct.
Okay, next thing is approval of the minutes. Is there any objection to the minutes? Hearing none, they are approved as unanimous. All right, so the next item on the agenda is the economic development plan. And so does one of our staff want to come on up and help us out here a bit? Just for the record, I am a veteran and I am over 65. So I do meet two criteria of diversity. But I am a white male. I will admit to that. Last I checked. Okay, Debbie, if you want to say
So-
something.
Sure. So Planning Commission held a public hearing on the economic development element and made a recommendation to forward it to council. So the next step is to present your recommendation to council. We originally thought that was going to be on February 26th, and that date has now had to move to March 18th.
March 18.
So if the commission has any conflicts on that date, please let me know, but tentatively, that's now the date where you would be presenting your recommendations. So this evening, the discussion was, as this is presented, how we typically do that is staff gives an overview of the element and how the element progressed through the process, and then turns it over to the commission to speak to particular topics of interest that they want to present to council. And then following that, then there is council questions. So we're turning it over to you, Chair, to have that discussion about individual topics for commission presentation.
So we have two parts of this. One is anything that you folks want to make sure I just highlight in my introduction. That doesn't mean describe and theorize on it. It's kind of like highlight and say somebody is going to speak to it because we feel it's important. And then the other items is to walk the dais here and figure out what are the parts that people would like to speak to or somebody should speak to. So with that, I will first entertain any hands. Chris, you know, I was going to start on your side, but I felt that that would be, you know, just being new, that would be cruel. But now you're going to do it.
All right, well, I had a couple different items that I was interested in, and I don't want to step on Derek's toes at all with TOD, since he wants to talk about golf carts. Fair enough, so do I. I do have a couple other segments in mind, but highlighting TOD is something I'm interested in. Highlighting the light industrial or clean light manufacturing demand, not
What
industrial.
page and number?
The clean light manufacturing is page 4F19.
19?
Yes. And it is line 3. And that's just something I thought would be good to highlight as we have some industrial area and manufacturing area. And then I'll leave TOD for you, Derek.
Okay, clean lighting. Okay. my trustee planning commission pad. All right, next, anyone wants to jump in? Okay,
I'll jump
go
in.
ahead.
Some of you are hopefully noticed I sent out a email earlier today. Thinking of speaking to a specific part, economic development, but overall, what I'd like to do is speak to. First of all, turn on my microphone. Always good to remember these rookie mistakes get you every time. One of the things I've come to notice as we've gone through not only this particular element, but many others, is how they all start to fit together. That given the changes in the environment out there, you really can't look at any one of these, environmental, housing, land use, all of them, you can't look at them separately. Climate change is another good one. That if you don't look at these in the current world, particularly as a future, you're going to miss, I think, something, particularly in economic development. So I did send something out, which I'd be prepared to pretty much read at some point during the presentation on the 18th. But I want to make sure that other people on the council agree with the sentiments that I've stated here, because I don't want to represent the council or the commission if they're not, if people aren't in agreement to that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I support Commissioner Vanderline's sentiments. I think they were the things that you wrote to us about, were things that we did talk about during the economic development discussion. And the one thing that I had thought I wanted to highlight in particular was the idea of our economic development being used inclusive and sustainable, which I think is that same idea that we are kind of taking a holistic view about economic development. So +1 to that.
Are we getting head nods on that? Oh, wow, that's,
I suspect there may be some who haven't had a chance to pull that down and read it. If you find later that you disagree or suggest some edits, please pass those along between now and 18.
so what you would like to do is this to be the point that you would speak to?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Olson.
I just wanted to say, I unfortunately did not get a chance to read this email, but looking through it now and hearing the description that was just provided, I think it is important to highlight concurrency and how these different elements work together. So I support this after taking a look through this.
Okay, could I ask you to speak a little slower and more enunciate clearly? So
Yeah.
it's easier for those of us, some of us who are not so quick, to stay up with you. So you wanted the concurrency amongst the other elements, or within this element?
No, I was just saying that I support Mike's statement here and highlighting concurrency between elements and how that's important. So highlighting how these elements work together and how, an individual element is kind of not useless, but they're greater than the sum of their parts.
Okay, and just to make sure we're talking the same term of element, you're talking about the different elements of the comp plan. Because elements, like you have a housing element, public works element, that's how we normally think. So is that what you meant too?
The comp plan, as well as other policy and regional policy that we are concurrent with.
else? Hey, Commissioner Wyckoff, Wyrick. Oh my God.
Are you asking for
I
points
think-
we would like to speak to?
Well, you would like to speak?
Yeah,
Yes.
I
Go ahead.
lost track of what.
Maybe I spent too much time at your place.
I wanted to speak to the, not sure what page it's on here, 4F-27 on the objective ED9 and ED10s for developing a culture of excellent service that supports all residents and businesses in Kenmore. And ED9 is enhanced communication between the city and local businesses. I have a personal situation with business that I wanted to bring to light and I can speak passionately about. And there are kudos that the city performed and there are opportunities for us to expand on those good deeds going forward. So I want to make sure that's spoken to in this opportunity.
Okay, and you'd be willing to speak to that? Commissioner Doyle.
Thank you, yeah. I would be open to whatever the pre-existing commissioners think would be a good piece for me to take. I feel a bit odd saying that I'd want to speak to something because really I was just privy to the conversation about the element versus being directly involved, because both Commissioner Olson and I started our terms after this was complete. With that in mind, some of the factual elements therefore kind of made sense to me. If we were talking about current conditions, that kind of thing, speaking to those would make sense. But even that, I think I want to work with folks. The email that Mike sent, it was very helpful in terms of identifying which current conditions are the ones that we think are most important to highlight to council. I know that's not a completely coherent thought, but hopefully you get where I'm going with that.
You said current conditions, is that right?
I think so, just because it's more factual than defining the strategy based on those, as it were. I would feel less comfortable talking to that because that was the discussion that you all had before we joined the commission. But I think speaking to the factual conditions would be more appropriate.
Is there anyone else? Okay, hearing none. Then we have Chris's first one, 19-3, clean lighting. And then Mike's got his page. Economic development talking points. Chris, you also talked about doing this internally and externally with a concurrence and relevant, so it all makes relevant sense.
Just to clarify, I just was voicing
Please.
my support of Mike and how his statements were kind of highlighting that. I think I inserted the word concurrent because that's how I interpreted it. But taking into what Mike was saying, or what I understand he was saying, is taking into account the changing situation and how each of these elements need to be in line with the rest of our policy approaches, and we need to be addressing upcoming changes and challenges. So.
Okay. And then Derek wants to expand on the good stuff on page 27 with ED 9 and 10.
Yes, correct.
And then Dorian wants to discuss the factual and current conditions as they relate to this element. Did I get that right?
That's right, and I think it starts on 4F5, the existing conditions.
Or F5, okay, let me look that. Existing conditions, that's, yeah, page 5, start with line 1. Right. So we have, and Chris has got 2 items, so either we have somebody volunteer to do it, or we Saad said we can just assign him one. You know, that's what happens when you don't come, accidentally, for a good reason, can't come to a meeting. So do it. No, okay. Which one would you like to, if you're happy to?
I'm interested to hear from Commissioner Olson about which he feels more strongly about speaking to.
Well, I think I unintentionally, are the 2 that you're referring to TOD and clean light manufacturing? Or are they clean light manufacturing and the concurrency piece? I just want to make sure.
Yeah, you're doing that routine again. You're speaking fast into the side. So,
Are the 2 items that you have written down TOD and clean and light manufacturing?
well, I have the lighting 19 line 3 and that whole piece, and then the concurrency.
Okay. Sorry, I think I'm miscommunicated that. I was simply supporting Mike's motion on concurrency. I think he's kind of already speaking to that, so I don't want to take that from him, if that makes sense. So I would be happy to discuss a different section. However, I would need to pull it up though, if Tracy is interested in clean and light manufacturing. But
So the point that I feel like I would most like to highlight to council is what Commissioner Vanderline is already saying. So I'm happy to have him present that to the council. And I don't need to say anything else unless there is a point that the commission would like to convey, and that could be helpful in that way.
Okay. Lost here. So you're going to take clean lighting, correct? Okay. And then you're going to do a piece of the economic development with that, and I can also point that out in my introduction. So.
Just a suggestion, I thought the piece that maybe I should just have read this is really kind of an overview. So maybe it would be good if I follow you, Dwight, and then the other folks are more specific after that.
Okay.
I think that might flow a little easier.
I would agree with that. And then we could go from that to the clean lighting, clean manufacturing, I mean, right? And then back to Derek for ED 9 and 10. Then Dorian for factual and current conditions 5. 1 plus existing conditions. That will be our presentation. Wow. Any other questions? Good, March. 2018. 18th. So we're green, everyone. Right. Our next item is missing middle.
Actually, before you move on, can I ask
Sure,
a
go ahead.
question? If we're going to have a joint meeting on the 18th, we are scheduled for a regular planning commission meeting the next day on the 19th. Are we still going to have that meeting, or what's the schedule?
Do
What do
you,
we say?
do you need us to meet? Oh, they're nodding over on the right side, and the left side is checking it out.
Very merciless over there.
Well, Debbie's the one
trying
that's
to-
merciless with us. Oh, possibly not. That's,
Progress.
are you gonna vote this 3-1? No. Why the clerks are saying no is because that way they don't have to work late.
If you need more time to look through the schedule,
Oh,
Oh,
I didn't mean to pressure you into a decision right now unless we get the one we want.
Oh, they have a docket in there.
it would be sort of continuing the housing discussion, would, and preliminarily is what we'd scheduled, on that date. But we have time if we, because really that's where we would be focusing on in terms of the docket for the first, couple of meetings in March and April.
Yeah, this Friday, I'm meeting with the consultant for the middle housing project, and we're gonna flesh out dates a little bit more. So if there was something to be scheduled that day, that would be the topic. But I don't know if, it's kind of TBD at this point, so.
So we
Yeah.
have time, because we'll be meeting again on the 5th. So we'll know more on the 5th and see if there's something that's appropriate and ready to bring forward on the 19th, or if it can wait. So if we can kind of delay that discussion about the 19th till March 5th, that would be helpful.
If I may, when will we be necessary for us to pass something on missing middle housing?
It's going to be several months before you're ready to pass something on to that.
So
on
there's
middle housing.
there's no pressure cooker on this. Exactly.
Well, we're trying to schedule out right now how we can make sure that we at least get the comprehensive plan update done by the end of this year. Our goal is to also bring forward concurrent development regulations for middle housing. State law does in fact give us till June of next year to have those development regulations in place. So it's going to depend. I mean, it's an aggressive schedule to try and get it done by the end of the year, but that's kind of our best bet. We have consultant help, and as Todd said, we're meeting with the consultant this week to kind of lay out some key meeting dates with the planning commission, with the council, and then public engagement as well. So we'll know a little bit more. So the purpose of this evening was to just kind of do a recap on where we've been with middle housing, for the benefit of the new commissioners, to sort of set that framework of where we will be going with middle housing. And that's the point of this evening. I believe we shared with you at the last meeting sort of the tentative schedule for docket, but
Yes.
I'm happy to share that again if you.
No,
need.
that's okay. I just wanted to be clear about the missing middle, and there's some feelings about not having a meeting, and I am also concerned about making sure that we have enough meeting time to meet all of our requirements. And so it's not something that we're gonna have to do by the end of June, but we do have to do it after that, before the end of the year. And that's all we needed to know.
I have a slide in the presentation
Right,
that at the
okay.
very end, it's called Next Steps, and that'll kind of give you a little bit of a brief synopsis of kind of what's to come. But,
Well, without further ado,
thank you.
let's do it.
So good evening, Chair, Commissioners. As Debbie said, we're bringing to you this kind of abridged update of kind of where we've been and kind of where we're headed here with phase 2 of the Middle Housing Project. As you know, I was not part of phase 1, so I'll let Debbie kind of speak to the latter half of this presentation, which will go over some of that information. But the beginning part of this presentation is really just to kind of reset the stage of where we're at, particular for Commissioner Dorian and Olson, who weren't part of that process, and then just to kind of remind the rest of the commissioners who were part of that, kind of what to expect. So anyway, this overview, I'll briefly just describe the examples of middle housing. Recent state legislation that was passed here in 2023 and the last session, not this current one, but the last one about a year plus ago. The ADU and middle housing implementation considerations. This will be stuff that we're going to be talking with you and council later this year. Public outreach findings. So this is getting into what happened in phase 1, community events, small groups, survey that was conducted. So Debbie will talk a little bit about that. Some of the community-based organization outreach findings, the racial equity analysis findings as part of that process, and then again, next steps and where we're going to head throughout this year. So the next several slides are really just some examples, picture examples of what each of these are. These are not in any shape or form things that we're going to adopt, approve, anything at this point. This is really just to set the stage and kind of give you a visual representation of what these are. And because you're going to see these over and over as part of our toolbox of options and that are part of the state legislation. So these are some examples of some duplexes. Some may be here regionally, some may be in other parts of the country, but at least this gives you an idea of what these duplexes are. So you may see some that are 1 or 2 story duplexes. You've got 2 side-by-side units here. They come in different shapes, forms, structures. So this gives you an idea of what the context could be in terms of a duplex. Moving on, triplexes. So we're just adding an additional unit. So instead of 2 doors, you've got 3 doors. They could be, again, in a single story option, but possibly more likely around in our neck of the woods, you're going to see more 2-story just because of space considerations. They still have to meet height requirements, setback requirements. There are going to be more discussions about that later. But again, this is just giving a visual representation of what these are. And then moving up the chain, if you will, in terms of unit density, these are 4plexes. So these have been common throughout the Northwest for a number of years in varying cities. You'll see these in kind of townhouse configurations, condos, apartments. So just basically, all grouped together, but you'll see them as sort of as four unit configurations all in one building. Could be all in a row, or they could have units tandem back to back. It just depends on kind of how the developer structures it and how the lot configuration is. And then cottage housing. These would typically be built around a common green or a common space. We've got a few examples out there that have been developed over the last 20 years, in particular Kirkland, Redmond, I think Bellevue, they all have these cottage type developments. If you do kind of a search online. You'll be able to find these. I encourage you to take a look at them if you haven't. They were kind of in vogue at the beginning in terms of trying to get more density back 20 plus years ago. It became pretty clear at that point that these were not in any shape or fashion affordable. And instead they became this kind of trendy type of thing that were then these cottage units were sold for upwards of, at the time, 600,000-700,000. Now you probably will see these maybe pushing $1 million, just because they're in context of this shared open space. You got pea patches with them, etc. Again, these are just options of different types of units that possibly can be considered. And then I'll show you one or two, I think we have one more slide here of types. Again, row houses, similar to fourplexes. These are kind of either in an urban setting or you can have more suburban with setbacks and whatnot. All of these really, and what this middle housing legislation is about is housing choices. So I know there's the differences between what we've talked about recently, which is affordable housing. What this is getting at is achieving more housing options than just straight single family throughout jurisdictions that are required to do so. So I'll get into the next couple of slides and talk about that, but at least these initial slides give you some context of what we're going to be talking about in code and policy. And we can certainly bring these up at any time in our discussion to kind of refresh your memory on what these are. I'm sure the consultant that we recently hired, they're going to have a lot more examples too to share and to discuss and their experience on working with jurisdictions. And just so you know, I think I might have mentioned this, but it's the same consultant lead, not the same company, but the lead that was part of phase one. He works for Kimley Horn and his team now. They're going to be helping on phase two. So familiarity with what was done, which is a good thing, and we're just carrying that momentum forward with the next phase. So moving on, two pieces of legislation were passed in 2023. One of these was HB 1337. That's the accessory dwelling units code. Or RCW, and this basically says that jurisdictions must allow for 2 accessory dwelling units on all single-family lots, but may restrict ADUs on lots that contain critical areas, meaning wetlands, steep slopes, or other kind of environmentally sensitive designations that property has. This also is going to prohibit owner occupancy requirements. So a lot of jurisdictions, many of whom I previously worked with, we adopted ADUs in hopes of having more types of flexible housing arrangements. However, there was always a prohibition of having the owner has to be living on the premise at all times in order to have an ADU. And this basically says that's no longer permitted. So this again is trying to encourage more housing types, more housing availability, in hopes that, again, it's not going to solve the affordable housing issue. It's just giving more types of housing out there instead of just straight single family. Must allow an ADU on any lot that meets the minimum lot size. It legalizes the sale of ADUs as condos and must allow separate sales of units. And then lots that are less than 6,000 square feet, you'd have 1 parking space or greater, you'd have 2. And then within a mile of a major transit stop, you wouldn't be required to have any parking spaces. That's another thing that's been of consideration, and it's even in further discussion with either this legislation period or legislative period or the next, that parking has always been a matter of concern, just because of how incredibly expensive it is to construct parking, especially on multifamily housing projects. So this has been an ongoing discussion both at the state level and local level. But this is just basically showing you kind of what this legislation would require in terms of the ADUs.
One quick question.
Yeah.
And if you'd go back a slide.
Sure.
So my concern is that the first bullet says, except for critical areas. So that means no exceptional use permits to allow the third bullet to happen.
I'm not following.
A minimum, so let's say you have a minimum, technically, you have a minimum lot size
Yes.
for an ADU. And, but according to bullet one, it seems that they could not apply for an exceptional use permit for environmental. Did I use?
Reasonable
Oh,
use.
reasonable use.
use. Yeah.
Gotcha.
gotcha.
Sorry, excuse
Yeah.
me.
Yep.
So typically, a reasonable use exception is when a lot is entirely impacted by critical areas and their associated buffers. The courts have said that a reasonable use is one house. So you can't
Right.
preclude development on a legal lot. And a reasonable use exception is one house. So I don't believe you could use the reasonable use exception to say, I want one house and 2 ADUs.
That's right. Yeah.
Go ahead, Commissioner Olson. Thank you very much for answering my question.
So to clarify here, would that still then allow an ADU but not a detached ADU or a DADU? If it's still part of the same structure and there wouldn't be additional environmental impacts?
I mean, right now you can build on lots which have critical areas outside of critical areas and buffers. So it would probably be the same for ADUs, is that if they can comply with critical area regulations, you can do that. A reasonable use exception is very limited in its application because it's when lots are entirely impacted by critical areas. There are a lot of lots out there which contain critical areas, but they're not fully impacted by critical areas. There still may be buildable area to allow building a structure similar to when single family homes are built when there is an area available outside of critical areas.
Thank you.
Oh,
Com-
hey, Chris, did you have a follow-up question or is it?
It was a different question, so you go
Okay,
first.
Commissioner Olson.
All right, I'll go
Yep.
first and then you
Oh. Go
can,
ahead.
you're okay with that?
Yeah.
Your bullet number 4 reminded me of an issue that I wanted to make sure, some information to make sure that we get from the consultant. And in our original version 2 of Missing Middle, we discussed this at some point. The ability to be able to sell either an ADU or if you're talking about a duplex, a triplex, fourplex, those individual units, making them available to be able to be sold as individual units. There's a limit on the ability to be able to get mortgages for those, that there's code requirements that the mortgage lender is going to want to see in place. So one of the things I'd want to make sure is that we have some clear direction from the consultant on what those codes would be and some evaluation of our current code to see whether or not that would allow that to happen. So I think this is very important. If one of the things we're trying to do is to be able to increase the amount of home ownership and make sure that when developing ADUs and multiplexes of any sort, that we're not just building rental units, that there is a path here to ownership.
I've gotten a couple questions on this. I don't know if Debbie has, but a couple people have emailed me about that very thing. And I know for certain that this will be addressed as part of our discussion. Mr. White is very well versed in these codes, and I'm sure when you met him the first time, he's very well in tune with the legislation. So I would expect nothing less.
Thank you.
Commissioner Olson.
This is my follow-up question. So it's my understanding that the parking space requirements, the last bullet point, those are minimum mandates. So they're saying that the city cannot set a minimum that is above that. Those are not maximums. An individual developer still can build however many parking spaces they want if they so choose, right?
That's
That's a good
that's a
question.
good
I,
question to clarify if it's a minimum or a maximum. I mean, typically, if you're restricting parking, there is restriction. So I guess the question would be, yeah, it's defining whether it's a minimum or a maximum.
yeah.
I'll make a note of that.
As a follow-up to that, just to clarify, I believe it is a minimum, but yes, please confirm that is the case. It's not saying that that is the minimum set. It's just saying that that's the minimum, at least this is my understanding, that's the minimum that a city can, the highest minimum a city can choose.
Highest, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I know, like I said, parking, just, this is just my, thought is parking is just extremely expensive. And so when cities were trying to adopt ADU codes, and you had a parking minimum required, that kind of deterred some people from constructing these because they didn't have the space or any number of reasons. And so, yeah, I could see which way is it? So we'll get that clarified.
Well, if I may, on that particular issue, in another place called Cannon Beach, Oregon, they had a similar type of problem with building ADUs or increasing their square footage on the cottages because they increased the requirement for parking. Well, then everybody wanted to include the parking space in the city right away to be able to be counted toward their requirement. And so that's going to be another issue that's going to be coming down our way. And I think there's a lot of different types of effects environmentally and for neighborhoods in those areas. So that's another whole topic. And I know that in this city, we're having some issues on our right-of-way areas between the telephone poles.
Yeah, it already exists in some cities. It just depends on their way of which way they're going with it, whether they allow that allowance on the street or not.
That would have to be in our code, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Commissioner Banazinski.
Todd, did you say what kinds of restrictions may be applied on lots that contain critical areas? Do we know that yet?
What kind of
It
restrictions?
says, but may restrict ADUs on lots that contain critical areas. I'm curious, but what does that mean exactly?
Perhaps the next slide is going to help out with that.
Yeah, I think that this one here. So location of ADUs would be permitted in R1, 4, and 6 zones, existing R1, 4, and 6 zones. And then lots outside of critical areas and assume 50-foot buffers. And then those that meet or exceed the minimum lot size of the zone. Does that answer?
But I think what we have to do, and this is something which is we won't be able to address this evening, but it's figuring out then state law, city's critical area regulations, and what, if there should be any additional restrictions on location of ADUs based on critical area information that we have. So this map is basically just is informational.
This was very rough.
It's very rough. It's not based, no one's gone out there and measured. There are some, like I say, assumption there of an assumed 50-foot buffer, and we know that some critical areas have larger buffers than 50 feet. So again, I think the application of critical area regulations and how those then will be applied to new ADU regulations will be a topic of further discussion.
Commissioner
But
Banazinski.
Debbie, this is just a follow-up. So the assumption of a 50-foot buffer was just an assumption for drawing this map, and that we will have further
Yeah,
discussion later.
This is just
And it's just
illustrative, basically to show, it's just to illustrate where critical areas are. And again, just kind of putting an additional buffer. This is not based on actually what's out there, but it's showing kind of the extent of critical areas and where the location of the R1, R4, 6 zones, but to actually then get into the details of what that means and how it's applied, that's where there needs to be more discussion. So this is not a map to actually show actual locations for ADUs. Absolutely not.
Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead.
Sorry, just on the previous slide, kind of back to her point. I think a piece that I'm now getting caught up on, which I previously hadn't really noticed, was the may restrict ADUs. Is that really a may? Or is that basically saying that there is a potential to allow ADUs in critical areas?
I mean, I think the answer again is we're gonna dive into this a lot deeper with the consultant and we'll get greater clarification. This is really just kind of, you know, very high level issues that we're dealing with, but we're not gonna solve any of them tonight or dive deep into them. So just kind of table those thoughts, and then when we get to the ADU part of the middle housing, we'll certainly, you know, get into the nuts and bolts of it and how it'll affect specific properties and setback, all of that stuff. So,
I have my pencil sharpened, so I'm ready to go.
great.
Okay, so implication.
Yeah, so, and again, regarding these, the considerations that we'll be asking the commission is whether to change setbacks for ADUs to encourage detached ADUs, whether additional reforms like permit-ready ADU program to make the permitting easier for homeowners, whether the city could encourage different types of ADUs, 2 ADUs in different areas, like lots with critical areas, and then how to assign housing capacity to the ADUs based on implementation. Again, these are just high-level considerations. These aren't all. These are just a few that were talked about in the initial conversations that you had. Some of these slides you might even remember from phase 1, and it's kind of just a repeat, again, just to get everybody on the same page. And then I'll transition here just briefly on 1110, and then I'll switch over to Debbie or ask you guys if you have some additional questions before moving backwards kind of in time to what you guys accomplished the first go around. So 1110 is really the middle housing legislation. So first we talked about the ADUs. Well, this is the duplexes, triplexes, the toolbox of different types of units that could potentially be allowed. Tier 3 is a city with less than 25,000 must allow 2 units per lot. However, I bolded the tier 2. We currently fall in just under 25,000, but as everybody knows, when we discuss the economic development land use, all that, we're literally at the precipice of hitting 25K, and it doesn't really make any sense to plan for tier 3 when all we're going to have to do is go right back and adjust everything when we hit that 25K threshold. So we're going to be planning for tier 2, which is why I boxed everything here in blue. So what you see here is a tier 2 city of at least 25, but no more than 75 has to allow for 2 units per lot, 4 units per lot within a quarter-mile walking distance of a transit stop, and then 4 units per lot if at least 1 unit is affordable housing. And again, this isn't applicable to lots with critical areas and buffers. There's going to be a little bit more nuances depending on what's happening on each individual lot.
Okay, may I ask a question?
Yeah.
So what level is truly affordable housing?
Again, it's how you define affordable housing. And I think when we went through middle housing, we developed a fact sheet and said that middle housing is more about housing choice than true housing affordability. It is less than your typical market rate single family home by virtue of it's typically a smaller unit. So in that respect, you have a home which is more affordable because it's less expensive than a traditional single family home. it is not what you think of as being affordable housing, affordable to folks earning 50% of AMI or 30% of AMI. That's not what this is. And so when we went through this in phase one, we tried to kind of clarify that what middle housing is and what it isn't. It's more, to me, it's more about housing choice, and the affordability piece, I think you need to be really clear about what that means in terms of affordability.
So what you're saying is nothing's changed since the last time we chatted about this.
No, those facts still hold true.
Okay. Commissioner Vandeling.
Would you remind me what a lot means? What is the definition of a lot? Is this R1, R2, R4, or where do we?
Well, a lot is a defined piece of property. It has boundaries and is described as such. So that's what a lot is. So a lot can vary in size. If you're building on a particular lot currently in the R zones, there is a minimum lot size that you need to meet. So you have existing lots, or if you have a larger lot and you subdivide it into smaller lots, those smaller lots then need to meet minimum lot sizes. So that's kind of what a lot is.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for. It still doesn't supersede the minimum lots.
No,
Size.
no. That again will be sort of part of the discussion though, is it needs to be, is having that discussion about lot size and what makes sense for lot size if you're allowing more units on a lot.
Commissioner Dorian.
Just touching on the tier that Kenmore is in, or that would be advisable for us to consider Kenmore to be within. So there's a user guide for the model ordinances out now from Commerce, and I'm sure that folks in our community will very quickly find that Kenmore is listed at the top there of tier 3. But the guidance you're giving us is that we should be considering tier 2 because we are very close to tier 2.
Correct, yeah, because once we hit that 25,000, we're gonna be in the tier 2, and we're gonna be asked to change the regulations to meet the tier 2 rules. And so our anticipation is we're gonna be hitting that 25,000, if not this year by new development, probably next year. And so it doesn't make any sense to adopt legislation in a tier 3 when we're just gonna be
And if
turn
I'm
right back around and change it again.
And to support what you said, also it makes fiscal sense because we have to go through what we're doing now anyway. So instead of throwing another 50, 75,000 or whatever else is just to redo a plan, you're right. We should just get this done.
I mean, it'd be a lot different scenario if we were at like 20,000. It was gonna take, maybe 7-8 years. But the fact that we're only, a couple hundred away, or 3, whatever it is.
And we have a couple large developments
Yeah,
going up.
exactly.
That'll be it.
Yep.
Commissioner Olson.
Forgive me if you've already answered this, but bullet point 3 in tier 2, I know we were just talking about the definition of affordable in this instance, and how missing middle is about housing diversity. And to me, I understand that. I guess I'm just a bit confused where this requirement from HB 1110 comes from. What is their definition of affordable in that instance? Is it what you were saying previously about smaller units, so it's below market rate?
I think that this is getting it more affordable, a level of affordable. The question then is the definition of affordable. And my brain's not keeping up with how that is defined if it is defined in state law or if it's more in terms of local. I think there is some definition in state law.
In the department, we've seen several of late tables that spelled out the affordable items.
And I think Commissioner
Yes,
Dorian.
Commissioner Dorian?
With a note that we should wait for the consultant, obviously, but I think I had read in the user guide that the state is suggesting 60% affordability for rental and 80% for ownership. But I think that there's a model ordinance. It means that we could have our own version of that, not above. I don't think they would allow it to be above that, but I think if we wanted to look at, yeah.
So I think it's, that's a question then in terms of refreshing my memory in terms of what is in state law as terms of a shall or a may, and is it set as a 60% is the most or the least? So again, that's something that when we get into that, again, the devil's in the details of implementing these regs.
So I found the user guide that Commissioner Dorian was referring to. So it's what it says for tier 1 and 2 cities. Dwelling units that qualify as affordable housing shall have costs, including utilities other than telephone, that do not exceed 30% of the monthly income of a household whose income does not exceed the following percentage, et cetera, et cetera. Rental housing, 60%. Owner occupied housing, 80%. And then units shall be maintained as affordable for a term of at least 50 years, et cetera, et cetera. So that's their definition of what it would mean in this context.
Thank you.
And if anybody has, wants to dive into this deeper too, this is on the Commerce's webpage. I could certainly send it to you all as a follow-up, but it'll probably answer just about any question you have with regards to what we're talking about tonight. Of course, we're gonna get in much, much deeper into this as we progress through the project.
Based on your consultant last time, he did it just like you're trying to do tonight, is bring us one step at a time.
Yeah.
Answering these actually can be very difficult questions. So we trust your selection with our consultant.
Couple more slides here and then we'll switch it over, or I'll give you one more couple moments to ask a couple more questions here and we'll switch to what's been done. Let's see, we talked a little bit about this in the ADU context, but this one's, again, just for representation. This isn't set in stone. R1, 4, 6 zones outside of critical areas and buffers, lots which meet or exceed the minimum lot size, and then those within a quarter mile of a transit stop. And this was a map as far as the guidance document that was done for the city, Debbie and Lori, when they worked on phase 1, and you may have seen some of that documentation. So this may be of some familiarity to you. And then lastly, here with regards to the first phase of this presentation, implementation considerations. So in 2022, the Kenmore population was 24,090. Considering the population, we were just talking about this 25K, we're recommending adopting tier 2 requirements. Whether the city should consider the alternative implementation process to implement the density requirements on 75% of single family lots. And then for areas within cities where 2 units per lot are required, 6 of the 9 middle housing types must be allowed, and this doesn't include ADUs. So we have this toolbox, which I've showed you multiple different types, and we have to allow for 6 of these 9s, not including ADUs. That's a separate requirement, and that doesn't get to count towards it, but it helps for your overall housing choices and whatnot. So any additional questions, and then we'll kind of
Commissioner Dorian?
I've sometimes heard this framed as if you're only allowed to build middle housing anymore. You can't build single family homes, but that seems like that's not true.
No, that's not true.
That's
Yeah.
not true.
Yeah. Yeah, there'll still be plenty of single family home developments. It's just that now there's an added layer of requirements.
So I have a quick question on this slide, the last bullet. Where 2 units per lot are required, nothing's required, correct? am I missing the,
I think this means that when we adopt this, I think that's the context of
Right.
this, then 6 of these types has to be allowed. Is that,
that's what you mean?
yeah, I think.
Because nothing's requiring anybody to,
But I guess what it is you have to have regulations that allow it. It's not saying that you are required to build a duplex, you're required to build a triplex. You have to have the rules that allow it. You could still build a single family house. This is then saying you adopt rules which would allow these other housing
Okay.
choice types. Is
that's what I
mean.
thought you meant.
Okay.
Just making sure. Any other comments? Commissioner Banazinski?
And just for clarity, so I'm sure I'm following along, 2 units per lot could be 2 duplexes or 2 triplexes, or a duplex and a triplex. No, okay,
Triplex is 3 units.
3 units, okay, all right.
Yeah, we'll get into the definitions of each of these, what these terms mean, but at this point, I would say 2 units is 2 livable spaces, residential units.
Okay. Then 6 of the 9 missing middle housing types, 6 of the 9 middle housing types must be allowed.
I wouldn't get too hung up on all the details quite
Okay.
yet,
Yeah.
so.
Okay.
Apologize if this is not as clear as we hope to be, but we'll, trust me, we'll get there with.
So I think where we're trying to get to is there needs to be some clarity around the number of units allowed and the housing types.
Yeah.
Because the housing types imply that there are more than 2 units. So that's where I think the discussion is and the clarity needs to come. Okay.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you. Oh, Commissioner Dorian.
So, yeah, one more thing, because I know this was a point of confusion at state for a while. I think what that last bullet point is making clear as well is that you can't preclude other types of middle housing just because you've allowed ADUs. There was that thought at one point, it's like, do they work against each other, the legislation? But I think that it's been cleared up now. You can't say, no, you can't have duplexes, but you can have ADUs. You have to allow.
Yeah, you have to allow them both. Mhm. Okay, so if you remember when we were talking about middle housing with Opticos, they were saying one of the things is to be successful for middle housing is you also need to have things that are walkable, some commercial space which is walkable too. And so we did a very preliminary analysis of that, about neighborhood commercial analysis. Looking at this will not be part of this current middle housing discussion. It would sort of be a phase 2. But there was interest in looking at perhaps allowing sort of where appropriate neighborhood commercial space would be allowed to support middle housing. So that would sort of be a phase 2 piece, but there was some preliminary work done in phase 1. When we did the work last year, I think the public engagement was around how framing the future of housing. That's kind of how we kind of put this. We did several events. We did a community event at the town square. We had some activities where people were putting dots on a map for different types of dwellings. We had comments where people could make comments. And we sort of asked about any concerns. And so we kind of noted both where people were in favor, thinking that this is a step in the right direction in terms of support for choice. There was a lot of support, more support for duplexes and cottage housing. There were community concerns about green space, traffic, and impacts to neighborhood tranquility. There were a lot more. These were just sort of a highlight level of some of the comments we heard at that event in favor and against middle housing. We also did some public engagement around small groups. And the idea of that was to have more of an intimate dialogue around middle housing. And I think some of you even participated in those small group discussions. And again, I think we heard sort of similar support for middle housing and also concerns raised, whether it's around affordability or neighborhood character and green space. So again, when we're looking at this, we still have to be mindful of that balance between allowing more choice and how you balance that with some of your other goals in terms of whether it's green space, environmental protection, tree protection, et cetera, et cetera. We also did a survey. And you can kind of see there that most of the survey respondents were homeowners rather than renters. The comments that there was not sufficient affordable housing. Now, what that meant when they said there's not sufficient affordable housing, whether that means I can't live here or the housing I have isn't affordable to me, it depends. And again, if you looked at the divide between ownership and renters, the people who were renters were way more in favor of more housing choice than current owners. Looking at kind of where middle housing would be supported, there was support near transit, but there was general, support for some allowance for middle housing. It was just a question of where it should be. So again, when we get into that discussion, devil's in the details, but this was done prior to the adoption of state law. So we were having this conversation when things were in flux and what was going to happen with state law. But I still think it was important to have that discussion around middle housing, about choice, about location, about why people supported it and what concerns people had. We also worked with a regional coalition for housing and with a couple of other jurisdictions who engaged Eastside for All to work with community-based organizations. And this was a very well-attended outreach efforts that they had. They had in-person events, they had small groups, and they actually engage community organizations who we don't often hear from, whether it's non-English speaking folks or, it was really interesting. And you can kind of see from the photographs here that they did have a wide and a diverse outreach. On the next slide, this is kind of showing the support for middle housing. In Kenmore, there were 40 people, and you can kind of see that 63%, and although it's a small number, there is still support for middle housing. And again, you can kind of see that the support, the kind of lower your income, the more support. If you're a renter, you're in more support, which is not really surprising. So this kind of, this information kind of reinforced what we anticipated hearing. This engagement work was done through a grant through the Department of Commerce, and part of that grant also required a racial equity analysis. So there was a report completed for that component. And this is just some of the information from that report to consider when you're adopting new policies, to consider the context and to consider that diversity, equity, and inclusivity lens. So now we're getting down to next steps. And again, for this next phase, we are fortunate to have received a Department of Commerce grant to assist with development of those middle housing regulations to look at consistency with state law. And although it is state law, there are still some local choices in how those regulations are developed. Certainly there's local choices around that. So we hired the firm Kimley Horn, and they will be assisting us in developing new comprehensive plan policies, because the ones that were adopted in 2022 are now not consistent with state law. If you remember, the comprehensive plan policies were to allow duplexes and triplexes within a quarter mile of transit. Well, that is now no longer consistent with state law. So the first thing we have to do is look at those comprehensive plan, land use and housing elements and figure out what we need to change to be consistent, or what new or amended policies we need to consider. And then once we have sort of preliminary direction on that, then we can start looking at the development regulations to implement those policies around middle housing and accessory dwelling units, cottage housing, small houses, and small lots. And some of those can go directly to council. For example, accessory dwelling units. We already allow accessory dwelling units. To amend accessory dwelling unit regulations would be consistent with current comp plan policies. So that is a choice, and that could go directly to the city council. We're looking at bringing the code part forward to the Planning Commission in spring. And as you know, amendments to the comprehensive plan can only be adopted once a year. So as every other element that you've done, you bring forward your recommendations. Council decides if they want to accept those or not. If they want to make substantive changes, they have to hold an additional public hearing and then make their final adoption at the end of the year. So, you know, again, you'll be kind of working on things, making your recommendations, and then council will be considering what they want to do. And the final adoption for all elements will occur at the end of the year. So that's what we have there. And again, the goal is to try and bring forward a package of both policies and regulations and have those adopted concurrently, but we'll see where we get, because I say we do have some wiggle room for development regulations to go into June of 2025 to be consistent with state law.
No matter how you cut it, it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. It can be done. Like I say, we want to make sure that we do this thoroughly, that there is sort of transparency in what is being brought forward, that there is an understanding of where there can be choices and understanding of where there cannot be choices. And I think that's sort of going to be important throughout this process and as we engage with the public.
That concludes our presentation for this evening. Any additional questions?
Commissioner Benzinski and then Commissioner Vanderleen.
Are there any plans for the DEIA committee, or maybe the Climate Action Committee, or both, to view our work and give us feedback at, excuse me, at any points?
We can certainly put that on the committee's agenda to give some feedback, and we can kind of talk to the consultant about timing for when that is best to do.
Thank you.
In this phase 2, are we contemplating any additional public engagement beyond the public meetings?
Yeah, there'll be some, not as intensive as phase 1, but we obviously need to have some level of engagement. What that is yet is to be determined. That's the ongoing discussions that we'll have here in the upcoming weeks.
Sure, that's great. So I assume that public engagement would follow after some point when we have a fairly well-developed set of policies and regulations.
I would imagine so, yeah.
Or at least policies.
Yep.
And we'll also continue to work with Eastside for All, because the folks that were engaged through that process are still wanting to be engaged. So we have the opportunity to reach out to Eastside for All and, you know, keep them up to date with where we are in this process, and opportunities for those community organizations to also continue to provide input and feedback.
Thank you very much. Okay, Commissioner Olson.
2 questions. The first one, would you, if we have any specific questions about setbacks, permit easements, floor area ratios, things like that, would you prefer if we send those questions over email just ahead of time? I'm assuming that's a yes, but I just want to confirm. Okay. And then the second question I had is, was there any plan for, I guess, a type of public engagement, like, I don't know if town hall is the right term, but to try and get folks from the community out while we're in the process to help communicate what is required and what we have choices on, and try and get additional feedback on what we have choices on, given the updates that are, given the most recent changes in state law that weren't in the works previously.
Yeah, I think that's something that we need to talk to the consultant about, is when is the appropriate time for engagement and what kinds of public engagement should that be? And I think I think we need to look at taking advantage of online opportunities as well. Looking at social media as a way of engagement. I think that people are very engaged in that way as well. As well as looking at, the formal public hearing. We want to make sure that there's more than just the formal public hearing opportunity for people to provide comment.
Yeah, I have some thoughts on Commissioner Olson about kind of structuring that. And I used to work with Mr. White, so that kind of helps. I know his style and how things, we've done some outreach in the past, but in terms of, I think you said it right, is trying to educate everybody, whether or not they know very little or a lot about this, and just trying to get everybody up to speed, as we try to do that tonight with you all, because we know that we've got a couple of new commissioners and some of you that worked on phase one and may remember it or not. And so we want to just at least refresh that, but also what are the things that we as a community have the flexibility to allow for, right? And I call it Kenmore-ize it, for lack of a better word. And then what are the absolute requirements, must-dos in the state legislation? So that's something that we would really benefit from, or the community would benefit from, and understanding what is it that we as a jurisdiction can and cannot do, and what flexibilities do we have. Because we obviously want to do our best to make it the best that we can for our residents and our community, but we also have to be complying with state law. So we'll work on, kind of the best types and, of outreach. And our goal is really to just kind of, reach all segments of the population in different formats, things that work better for them. We may even still go to places like we did, but it's probably not going to be as robust, just because of the length of time that we are restricted to adopt this in. So comp plan really is first and foremost, because that's required by the end of this year. Our goal, cross our fingers, is to get the regulations adopted in tandem with this. But if it edges over into 2025, if we have to, we'll extend that time period. But our hope is to get this all kind of lined up perfectly so that the council has it as a complete package and can adopt it. But we don't want to assume or rush anything, so.
Certainly one of my goals as chair, and I would hope that the majority here would feel the same way, as we remember the last time this went to the council. And I personally would like to present something that is not going to blow up at the council level, either by accident or on purpose. So we really have a lot of work ahead of us to provide the council with the very best option, because there will be some people, no matter what we do, that are just not going to like it. But maybe we can get the vast majority understanding and coming to a compromise of where we need to be. And that would be one of my personal goals. Commissioner Olson.
hopefully this is the last thing I say, but yes, that was exactly what I was getting at, or would like to get at, is I don't want this to blow up. I would ideally like to get input on some of these things earlier, so that way, you know, if people are upset about something or concerned about something, they can come and talk to us while we're making the plan, and have that process be a little bit more incorporated, and less we put a bunch of effort, make a plan, and then have to like go back and rework it. I think it kind of worked out last year just because there were state changes. So it had to be readjusted anyways, as we're doing now, and we'll continue to do the rest of this year. But that's why I mentioned a town hall, just some event to try and pull those people who are passionate about this out sooner rather than later. And yeah, anyways, I look forward to hearing what you have to say on that more in the future. But thank you.
So we'll move on to the next item of business. Thank you. Appreciate dealing with the complexity and being very comprehensive with your approach. It's a nice way to get started. Thank you. It's a lot of work. So our next item is the rules. And I wanted to start out by saying that I will be speaking with the city attorney on Friday concerning the issue of quorums outside our meeting, and what situations where we need to be concerned and where we have to give notice of potential quorums. So that's going to be clarified, because I think there's, at least even in my mind, there's a couple question marks that still are there, but it doesn't, it has no bearing on these rules today. So we have, I printed out 13 pages, and of those 13 pages, I would, first of all, as with what will be in the rules, if there's no objection, we'll allow our commission clerk to make any administrative and grammatical and organizational corrections. All right. Hearing no objection. So this is the one that we're looking at, is January 2023. So the first red marks are on page 6. And we discussed this quite thoroughly about public comments. Moved it to 10 p.m. just so you know that's in there. And we kept it at 3 minutes. I believe that's what we said, and we weren't going to go down. And that's the issues on page 6. And then I also put in that suggestion that the parliamentarian, as you see in red D, is for whoever's sitting in this chair to remind people, all they have to do is say, I agree with so-and-so, and move on. Any comments? So if no comments, we'll go to page 7. The top of page 7 has, there's that first paragraph has to do with the clerk putting on our public hearing notices that if we have to make a decision before the next meeting, scheduled meeting, that we may either hold over, go later, or we may hold it over to a special meeting. So we did that, and also that there will be paper copies of hearing and public comment rules available for the public. Did we discuss the issue of, particularly since it came up at the council, putting a limitation on staff presentations to 15 minutes for a public hearing. And I'm ready to get darts thrown at me or us, but we just got to keep it. We got a lot of feedback but I think 15, and if we have to go to 20 in a reasonable situation, I think we can do that. I see your finger moving. Is that like you want to say something?
Yes.
Commissioner Olson?
Just to be clear on this item, yeah, that 15 minutes is not necessarily our questions included in that.
Generally, you mean questions of the presenters?
Yes.
We generally do not ask questions for presenters. If they are, they're very quick and to the point.
Okay. Or after the presentation.
After the presentation, you can have at it.
Perfect.
But the goal of the staff presentation is to bring everybody in the room up to a certain level of information. It's not intended, we, by that point, should have already deluged them with all of our questions and they've responded with all the answers. Otherwise, we wouldn't be going to a public hearing.
Perfect.
Agree. I mean, the audience for that presentation is the public, not us.
That's right. Except when for the public hearing, when they're talking, then we are that's true. Okay. So, the rest is, just reorganizing the, quasi-judicial issues. And then I'm on page 8. Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry, Commissioner Banzinski.
Could page 7, line 39, could it read resident comments?
Page
7, line 39.
39, okay.
Can it read period for resident comments, just to be consistent with how we've been moving all of our other documents? Replacing
Sure.
citizen with resident.
Is there any objection to that? Did our clerk catch that? Okay, you want to read the amendment?
Page 7, line 39. The chair opens the public hearing period for resident comments instead of citizen comments.
Resident comments.
I got it. Thank you.
Okay, is there any objection to that amendment? Hearing none, it's adopted. So with moving down past the quasi judicial, which is just pretty straightforward, it has to do with the exceptions for quasi judicial issues. Then again, we've limited the whoever's doing presentation to about 15 minutes. And the other stuff has been just moved around. So we're going to go to page 9. I put in here, this was somewhere else, but motions will not be made during the public hearing regarding the matter being heard. That's just stating what's obvious. Just because somebody gives us a good idea, we're not going to move it right there. That would be out of order. And I mean, so if anyone asks you, why didn't you just do it? Well, because we can't. Have to give everybody an opportunity to speak. Excuse me. Let's see. And here, okay, so we're on page 9, right? Here we go. Now, the rules of decorum, you might want to read them carefully from page 9 to 10. Most of them you have not, you've seen before. Per the city attorney and what happened at the council meeting, I struck out a bunch of stuff about 4-letter words and things like that that are spoken appropriately during their testimony. But obviously, if someone starts swearing at somebody on their way out of the meeting, or does a personal attack, a verbal attack on an individual or a commissioner or staff member, that's a different issue. And then there's the interrupting. There's interruptions procedure. And it's a little, it really says that I'm supposed to give, or the chair, excuse me, supposed to give 2 warnings, not just 1. I thought that 2 is reasonable. And it's going to be taped, so no one can say it didn't happen. And then I just eliminated, the commission has to take a motion to move the public hearing to another date and time, but I took out the whole thing that says we're going to stop the hearing, meaning no more testimony. That's inappropriate. That's plainly, and I think it's unconstitutional. I don't know if that's the term, but more illegal than anything else. We'd get the book thrown at us for doing something like that. And our attorney certainly would not approve. Anyway, so that's, if you read through that paragraph, I think it's a little softer, but yet firm. And the main thing we're looking at, right, we all said, a safe place for people to come and address us and not feel that they're being persecuted on either side. And I hope, I will enforce that, and I hope that anybody that's sitting in this chair will do the same, because I just think that that's a bottom line right and value that we need to have. So in some ways, whatever happened that night kind of helped all of us get it clear. So now the other thing, I moved on section 6. When there's a public hearing, I moved it to the top of the agenda. Yeah, that was not just a yes, but Commissioner Dorian.
This is where I had a motion.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, no, very good as well. I just had a motion at this point that for the order of business, if we could mirror what City Council is doing and add a land acknowledgement after the call to order in our order of business.
Okay, the land acknowledgement, right, okay. That's your motion, so I'll second that motion, and so that will be immediately after the call to order.
I think that's when council has it, yeah.
Now, I'll just bring up the topic. It was thrown at me a couple times in the last couple sessions of our terms of our, as whether we should have a flag salute. So I just wanted to bring that up to, usually we are officials of the city. And we're statutory both by RCW and by Kenmore. So it's not like we're an advisory committee. We're a standing commission. So it's up to, I would wait Well, we have a motion on the table, so let's do this. But I just want to throw that out. So while you're thinking about it,
Yeah.
it's been moved and seconded that after.
Can I ask a question? It was moved by Commissioner Dorian. Who seconded it? Okay, thank you.
It's been moved and seconded to add the land acknowledgement as used by the council. Add that, no objection. Would be after the call to order and before any business. Is there any discussion? Are there any objections? Hearing none, it is adopted unanimously. Next is.
Yeah, given that you've raised that, and it was good that you've raised that. I think I just checked that the council follows the land acknowledgement with the flag salute. I think that's the order that they run their
Oh, yes.
order in. So if I can make that motion, that we then add as a third order of business a flag salute on.
Well, it'd be the second order of business.
Is that okay?
But
Yeah,
we'll
call
take-
to order and then
we'll
yeah.
take care of that.
Yeah.
Okay. So it would, for the clerks, B would be the flag salute and C would be the land acknowledgement.
Okay,
We
flag.
always do the flag salute before anything else.
Okay. And we're gonna do the Pledge of Allegiance, or we're just,
Yeah, we're gonna do a pledge of
Okay.
allegiance, yes. We're not. Okay. Yeah, right. I was thinking we were discussing, but I'm past that. Okay, so it's been moved and seconded.
once again, who moved it? Dorian,
And I
Commissioner Dorian,
seconded.
and you seconded it, Chair Thompson?
Chair
Okay.
can always second a motion, which is actually in the rules that I put. It's a standard Robert's Rules of Order. A chair can always, to move it along, can just say, when I don't second it, that means I'm not sure if it's going to, people might not want to talk about it. So then I'll wait for somebody else. Anyway, it's been moved and seconded, and we're talking about the pledge.
Chair,
Go ahead.
a question has come to our attention that the land acknowledgement is first on
No.
council,
In the council.
in the
procedure.
council agenda.
It should be the flag salute, should always be first. I mean, I appreciate the land acknowledgement, but I've never seen, except in Kenmore. But I guess if we do it at, like the council does, I guess we can do the land acknowledgement. What does the commission want to do? I don't. Wyckoff.
I would like to move that we take a brief recess so that I may dehydrate.
We're in a 5-minute recess. So We're not on live. Okay, we're back in order now. We're on live. So I just wanted to point out a issue that staff was so kind to just suggest as a point of information is that possibly the reason they do the land acknowledgement first is because our predecessors were here before we were and before the state of Washington was here, or the territory of Washington, and before the state and the Fed. So that is another logical way of looking at it. What would you folks like to do? Commissioner Olson, welcome back to the dais.
I move that we keep it in line with the council order and we have the flag salute after.
So the suggestion is the land acknowledgement should be first. Do I have nods for that?
I think that's a logical order.
Okay, so hearing no objection, it's so ordered that the land acknowledgement will be B and the flag salute will be C. Wonderful.
Can I verify? So Commissioner Olson made the motion, correct?
Sure.
Commissioner Wyckoff seconded the motion? Okay. All in favor?
See, this is a lot easier than missing middle housing, you know? All right, so we've got that done. And then I added under consent calendar, commissioner excusal, so that we'll make a list of we'll just make, that way we clean that up and it's on the minutes. Other than that, it's the same old, same old. Okay, any other items on page 10? Oh, we're just cruising here. So we're now turning the page over and there on page 12 is what you all wanted, was the 10 p.m. And then I added another sentence, and just tell me if you, because we kind of went back and forth on this, and it says, if a public hearing has been scheduled and lasts longer than 1 hour, then the meeting is continued until 11 p.m. That's only public hearing. Commissioner Olson, I saw that hand.
Just to be clear, does that mean that if the public hearing, if there are still people who wish to speak at say 11 p.m., we would cut it off and reschedule to another meeting?
No, if we've had public hearings where no one showed up, and all that means is our 10 o'clock rule applies.
Okay.
What I'm trying to suggest is that if we have business to do and a public hearing takes an hour, that we still have the time to finish our regular business, if that needs to happen, that's all. We automatically extend from 10 to 11. Not to say you have to stay here or that we have to talk all the way from 10 to 11. We just don't have to move extensions. Want to make sure that engineer self of yours is clicking away on this, you know?
Yes. I guess that's what I was originally thinking, is perhaps we would want to check in and see if we're all still in a state of mind to continue business, but it goes until 11 p.m. And after thinking about that, I think if we needed to extend past 11 p.m., that would probably be where I would have my hard limit. So I'm not going to, I don't have any issues with this as it stands now.
Just so the alternative is that we strike the 11 and we get to 10 o'clock and we just extend. It's up to you, the group. If that's what you want, you can just make that motion and then we'll just do the.
I think I prefer this, as if we do have business to attend to, we aren't spending time confirming if we're, going to, yeah, we've already decided. We know at that point it's gonna be going to 11. If we need a recess or whatever, we can request a recess. And we could also make a motion to say, hey, is it acceptable to end at 10:30 in the event that
Let's
we
do
don't
it
think we could
next
do that?
week, yeah.
So,
And we've done that where Debbie has said, we can finish this next meeting and, we don't want to stretch our staff too far, they're just really, they get to 10 o'clock and we're falling asleep and they are too. So, it's tough. Okay, so we're through page 12. So now we're on page 13. And I just put that in just so that I wanted to clarify that because you have to go in the Roberts rules deep to find that. Okay, so the double dipping rule is on line 37 and 38 on page 13. If you remember the double dipping rule. Okay. For those of you, would you like to know what the double dipping rule is? The double dipping, yes, okay. Sometimes I. Okay. So, all right, come on now. I got her laughing now. That's a good thing. So that's great. Okay, so what we are not allowed to do is to get up from our dais, walk around and testify to our own commission as a private citizen. That's considered legally and procedurally double dipping. We can't, now we can go and talk to the council or to wherever the people want to go as a citizen, but not to our own body. The council can't do that either. So, but I thought we'd put it into the rules just so it's clear. Commissioner Banaszewski.
This is the same request I have as before on page 13.
Page 13.
Line 37, may it please read, a commissioner shall not testify or give public comments as a private resident before the commission.
Yeah, and that's what we're talking about, the double.
I know, but it says citizen here.
So as a resident,
Private resident.
private resident, or just resident?
Resident's fine.
Yeah, okay. Any objections? Okay, so what we just did is without objection, we changed citizen to resident. Okay, Madam Shannon? Okay, I wouldn't want to move ahead without you. All right, so now we're to 14. That's 14 and there's no changes on 14. 15's blank and 16 is no changes. We had all of that last time. That leads us to 17. Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Dorian.
Not a change, just a question on 14 about the sharing of information. Just because, we all had that OPMA training, where we're encouraged to share, that should be without a perspective though, right? Because if we share with the entire commission, but give our own spin, like, yeah, and look, isn't this a great point? Shouldn't we all vote this way? That would be we'd suddenly be in a meeting instead of just forwarding, hey, I got this information, I'm just sharing it so you can have it. Does that
If you receive information via email or any other way, what's supposed to happen is that's supposed to be shared with our clerk. And then the clerk is aware of what things need to be fully shared or what is de minimis and really doesn't matter, or we'll talk or she'll talk to Ms. Bent.
Okay,
Does
thank
that
you.
make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. that makes sense.
And we all know the rule, you can't do roll counting of votes
Yeah.
outside of the meeting. Okay. Does everyone, do you understand what that is? Okay. Oh, you were here? Oh. That's a good line. Thank you very much. All right. All right, so that was 14, and now we're back to 15's blank, and 16 is, and 17, and there's no other changes, correct? Go ahead, Commissioner Olson.
This is a minor clerical change. I see that we've changed December to January 2023. Should that be 2024?
Should have been 2024. You know what happened is that was on the wrong page in the beginning and it did weird things. So that's just fine. So I am sure our clerk would have caught that. But now it's going to be adopted as of today.
Technically, it's February too.
Okay.
But it was January when we talked about this last. That's why it's going to be adopted as of tonight, we hope.
So it would be February now then, given that
Okay,
we
is there
made
any
changes?
other, if someone would make the motion to adopt the rules before us as amended.
I move to adopt the rules before us as amended.
I can second that.
Okay, it's seconded by Commissioner Dorian. Now, and you're going to put in the language of the rules as adopted and whatever we're looking at, okay. And for the record, today is 6th, and that will be the date of effect of these rules. Is there any further?
Chair Thompson,
Oh,
could you have them adopted subject to city attorney review?
we've had that.
The motion was? Okay,
What?
just wanted to clarify.
The only thing that's outstanding that we're going to talk about is issues of quorum, of notice of quorum outside of this meeting.
I just want to make sure that any reference that's to state law or anything regarding, say, quasi judicial or anything is consistent. I'm sure it is, but I think it would be advisable to have the city attorney give the rules a once over.
Yes, she has.
Oh, she has?
Yes, she has.
Oh, okay. I wasn't
And
aware of that.
not only that, I got most of those quasi judicial things right out of the council rules. So that way it was a lot easier.
Okay, I wasn't aware the city attorney had already reviewed the draft.
She's had copies, so has Rob. That was like 3 or 4 weeks ago. So we're good. So it's just that one issue that I just said, but that's not in the rules right now. Thank you for being concerned about us. She always tries to keep us in line. Rightfully so, is right. All right. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing no nays, the rules and procedures as of today are adopted, noting that Commissioner Quadre is absent, as excused absence, which is another item. I move that Commissioners Quadre be excused due to the sudden personal issue that has come up tonight.
Second.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, Commissioners excused. So in the future, when I hear this, I'll make sure it's on the consent calendar. So please, and if you're going to be gone, make sure you send one to me and one to Shannon, and she'll put it on the consent calendar. All right, so that's done. We had, for the good of the order, I wanted to bring up the Seattle Times article. That was a hot potato. See what, as we know, the housing requirements for affordable housing and are less than 30%. Very, what I forget what the term is. It's yeah, there's the 30 below, and there's also supportive housing that, pardon? Permanent supportive housing is for real in the state law. So any thought about how we're going, is the housing element coming back, fully back to us? Oh, she's gonna keep us, we're just having a discussion. Good.
We do have to make some amendments to the housing and land use element to be consistent with state law regarding middle housing. And also to be consistent with the numbers that came out for housing allocations. There was some more specificity that came out. So those are the changes that we'll be looking at. That address your question.
Since you're right there, I just can't help myself, but how many actual applications do we have made in the department in the city for pardon? Multifamily housing?
I don't have the answer to that, and that is in the Development Services Department.
Okay.
So I don't know how, and you're asking me how many current permits are open for multifamily development?
Yes, because like especially down on 522, where they took down the restaurant. I've heard of that one, and I've heard of another one next to the smoke shop over here by Safeway. That's 2. And I thought there was a third one. Pardon? Jay's Cafe would be 3. So I'm just curious if there are actual development applications for any of them or anything else down on where we raised we adopted the TOD rules or element rules.
Okay, so your specific question is, are there any new developments along 522 in the TOD corridor that have come in since the TOD rules were adopted? Is that the question I'm going to address? Okay, then I'll need to chat with the Development Services Director and get the answer to that question. I just want to understand what the question is. Okay.
And one of the reasons I am asking that is because of some of the comments that were made during the Plymouth housing
Well,
Public
that was
hearings.
outside, that's outside the TOD. So again, what are you asking me to bring back? You're asking me to bring back the number of active developments along the 522 corridor, specifically in the TOD, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Oh, I just
Go
wanted to
ahead,
make sure I could
Commissioner
speak,
Olson.
sorry. Could we also get the range of housing types, so affordable housing units in those projects? And if it is affordable housing, what portion it's targeting, whether it's 30% AMI, 60% AMI, multifamily, or sorry, not multifamily, family, or single resident, for instance, as well, when you bring that information back.
Sure. So this is just for informational purposes, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And the different applications may not have that information yet. Is that possible too?
If that information is available as part of the application, I'll bring that forward. So you're asking for the kind of application and the type of units, number of units and type of units, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
So does anyone want to comment about how, or have some ideas of how we're going to work at getting to our affordable housing requirements, number requirements from the state? Go ahead.
Is that on our docket?
Well, we are the planning commission, and I think that the issue of it's kind of like how missing middle housing came back at us, and the question of the affordable housing requirements that the state has on us are not going to go away. So it's something sooner or later we may have to deal with directly, or maybe somebody has an idea of something which we, can discuss. I'm not suggesting we go outside. We can't create our own docket, but yet we can create some ideas. Go ahead.
I don't necessarily have an idea. I think we have a challenge in front of us if we're looking at the housing element again this year, and it sounds like we are, alongside some other elements that we're looking at, like the downtown element, just within the realms of how much buildable land we've got. Do we even have enough buildable land to build the homes that we've got a target for, specifically at 30% AMI with permanent supportive housing as well, because all of that is going to need to be close to transit. And as a new commissioner, I don't even have the information to begin to start to solve that problem. I think I'm aware that it's the challenge that we've got, because there's other things we want to use that land for downtown as well. But we obviously have some very clear targets. So that's front of mind for me as we start to have these discussions.
Well, if I remember the chart, we have a lot of housing units, not even counting the affordable housing to build to meet our 20-year requirement.
We have sufficient capacity to meet the number of units we're required to do. So of the number of units we're required to do, some units have to be at a certain level of affordability. We have enough land capacity to have the number of units. The capacity is not the issue. What the commission will be looking at in terms of the land use and housing element is, as I said earlier, is to look at what amendments are needed to be compliant with state law, and to confirm that the housing units that are currently included in the housing element are still consistent with the numbers that were adopted by Commerce and implemented by the county. I believe that they are. That's what we will also be double checking. We're not going to be getting into any implementation regulations other than for middle housing.
How does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It's very good to know that we have the capacity that, you know, as someone new to this, I see those numbers and they look scary. But if we've got the capacity, that's great, and definitely good guidance that we're not looking at those implementation regulations specifically. I feel like there's other things we are going to look at that will touch on it, like the downtown element. I think has to have elements that are going to touch on where we can build a housing. But I understand we're not going to specifically be looking at HB 1220. I think was where those numbers came from. So it makes sense.
And for the downtown, again, it's looking at it as a policy level. We're not going to be getting into looking at the implementation regulations for downtown as part of this year's docket.
Could you just give us, when you say the policy level would be, because the downtown, it's got an element already. So what are we really going to be looking at? Rather, you know, it's not implementation regulations, but
Correct.
what would be an conceptual thing that we might look at?
Well, like any other element that you've done so far, it's taking a look at that introductory section to bring that up to date with any new information and facts, and looking at the policies that are currently in place and seeing if those are sufficient or if any new ones need to be added or amended. So that's kind of the approach that we've taken. It's not going to be a full rewrite of the downtown element. This is kind of a refresh, similar to what you did for the economic development element.
Okay.
You can, I mean, it's not saying that that's the end. I'm just saying that in terms of this year's docket, that's kind of how we can get the full comprehensive plan updated. It's a refresh. Whether there's the need to take a deeper dive or look at more implementation measures, that may be on a future docket. It's not going to be part of this year's docket.
Okay. Well, it's also like Lake Point is not on our docket this year. Which is another.
Lake Point would probably not be on your docket anyway, because Lake Point is part of downtown. You'd be looking at it from a policy level, but not from a project level.
Right.
That gives me a question. So looking at the downtown from a policy level, we would be looking at things, however, like multimodal mixed-use development zoning and how, or not multimodal, apologies, multifamily and mixed-use development zoning. And that could include things like affordable housing, not housing choice, but affordable housing.
It's a policy level. We would not be getting into zoning regulations. Those are implementation. So the Planning Commission, at least for the downtown element, will be taking a look at the policy level for what is the expectation for downtown, not looking at the zoning regulations that are currently in place for implementation.
Or specific projects. That's not what we're
Correct.
looking at.
That's not the role of the Planning Commission.
Okay. I just wanted to bring that because it's such a hot topic, and we need to keep that kind of item in the back of our mind if some of us are particularly concerned about where we're going with affordable housing and if the council has made that their number one priority. Now, we may not be able to do a thing, but I wanted, while we have, for the good of the order, an opportunity to talk about that. The other item, if there's no further on that, the other item I wanted to bring back around was an email and a response from the president of Bastyr, which I thought that was a good response that he gave to the other email that we received. And I guess the question is, you've seen, you know about the president's email, right, Debbie?
I have seen that. I mean, again, I think the email to the commission, it's not really a commission docket item. It's not part of the planning commission work program. And so there was outreach to Bastia, and Bastia did provide clarification. So I don't think there needs to be further discussion.
Okay. All right, thank you. Anything else for the good of the order?
Perhaps. I guess I have a question for
Commissioner
Debbie
Olson.
while I've got her here. Looking forward to the downtown element, or frankly, probably a number of other elements. One thing that's top of mind for me is connectivity, especially pedestrian and bicycle connectivity. And I'm assuming that would be the type of policy directive that we're discussing would be, we look to improve connectivity in Kenmore, diffuse grids, et cetera.
I think, again, a lot of these elements are interrelated. So talking about multimodal, whether it's pedestrian or bike, a lot of that is discussed in the transportation element of the comprehensive plan. There may be some overlap to talk about some kind of connectivity or pedestrian connectivity in downtown, but largely those policies are in the transportation element. But there's often overlap between elements, for sure.
Okay, thank you.
And the transportation element we did just
Correct.
earlier, so, and we did address, you were probably here in the audience, like our other friends, that when we discussed that very topic. Do you have any other questions, anyone else? So our next meeting is we get back on our normal schedule again.
Yes.
Wonderful. Anything else? Hearing none, it's 9:20 and the meeting is adjourned.